Hello out there, and welcome to Even Footing Game Presents, a conversation with creators around the internet who are into some wonderfully wacky and weird stuff. I'm your host, Jason, the creative director for Even Footing Games, and I am thrilled tonight to be speaking with our guest. Our guest tonight is the creative force behind the podcast, Monstrous Agonies. It's a relationship advice show for members of the Creature Encrypted community. Monstrous was born out of that fantastic mix of a need for creative outgrowth and unemployment, which I think a lot of us can probably understand, especially during the pandemic. Monstrous Agonies has quickly become a favorite podcast amongst fans of horror and fantasy and positive queer representation. The show recently, when we were recording this, finished its second season and celebrated that with getting a nomination for the 2022 British Fantasy Awards for Best Audio. Hailing from Northern Ireland by way of England, I am thrilled to welcome writer, actor, producer, and creator H.R. Owen.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Hello. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's very exciting. I sound quite impressive when you put it all together like that.
It is quite impressive. So the way I like to set these up, HR, is just a sort of
You can call me Hero. I usually go by Hero.
Great.
Yeah.
Hero. Let's go by Hero. You know what? I'm dubbing this one A Hero's Journey.
Oh, beautiful.
That's how I am. Yeah. That's just the type of
You'd think I'd have heard every variation of that joke, but I haven't. That was new. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Usually people start singing at me.
I need a hero? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sad I missed the opportunity there.
Yeah.
So, Hero, I found Monstrous Agonies during the pandemic, especially the shutdown in the U.S., because, that's where I'm. And I was just listening to everything that I could find because there was nothing else to do. And it came along at just the right time for me. I'm guessing it came along at the right time for you. Can you tell us a little bit about how Monstrous came to be?
Yeah, so I have had a lot of different jobs in different industries. So I did my undergrad in theology, then I worked at a peace center for 2 years, then I did a master's in history, then I worked in a toy shop, then I worked at a community funders, and then I was accepted onto a grad scheme at a big publishing house in London. And all of these things happened sort of, that is not the career path of somebody who is planning what they're doing next. I just sort of fell into one thing to another. And then when I was in London, I realized very quickly that I did not want to be in London. I've lived in Northern Ireland since I was 18, so over a decade now. I just realized I turned 30 quite recently. Yeah. I'm like, oh, it's actually quite a lot over a decade, isn't it? It's not.
Welcome to your 30s.
Everyone I loved was on a different landmass, and I didn't like publishing as much as I thought I would, and I didn't like being in an office and all of these things. So I was like, okay, well, I've got some savings. I'm going to quit my job, and I've got enough money that I can just go back to Belfast, where the cost of living is extremely low, and you can do this sort of thing, and just take my time and relax and chill out for a bit. So I handed in my notice in February 2020 and got back to Belfast in March 2020 for my year of rest and relaxation.
Oh my gosh. You picked the best time.
Just incredibly well timed. And on the plus side, I mean, nobody was hounding me about like, oh, have you got a job yet? Have you got it? Everyone was just like, yeah, no. And it, in a lot of ways, it meant that the pressure was off even more drastically than I had planned for. It was really like, oh, not only do I not have to do anything, but actually it's not safe for me to get an office job right now. And there aren't any anyway. So, and then I've been writing for quite a long time and with not a huge amount of success, sort of the odd short story in the odd magazine and a bit of, it's, sort of things here and there. But just what I was getting frustrated at was the feeling of not being able to, knowing that, not to sound like a wazzock, but like knowing I'm quite good, and I can do it. Sure. And I know what my strengths are. And I knew that I had good things to write and good things to say that people would enjoy, but not being able to get them to the audience, because if you're going through traditional publishing, it's so hard. And I mean, I used to work as well as a slush pile reader for a short story magazine. I know how arbitrary those decisions are. You know, I know that it could just be that you got the slush pile reader who doesn't like monsters, or who has just read 3 other vampire love stories, and yours is just another one, you know?
Is that a genre? Is that a thing?
Yeah, right.
Really?
But like, you know, I know how arbitrary that is. And so I started thinking like, okay, well, what can I do that is going to get my work straight to the people who are going to want to be consuming it? And podcasting, I think, is really unique, especially audio fiction, I think is really unique as a fiction medium, because you get straight to your audience, but also it's the norm. Actually, it's you know, it's absolutely the norm for people who are fans of audio fiction to listen to first time indie podcasters recording on their laptop and just try and make it sound okay, you know, and that's normal. Whereas self-publishing is, you know, great and fantastic, but most people get their books from a bookshop.
Yeah.
You know, most people get their music from the radio or from Spotify. And if you're not in those places, you're not going to get discovered. Whereas audio fiction, you really can just walk in and go, oh, I've got a podcast. And people go, oh, cool. What's it about? Let me listen. Let's give it a go. So yeah, that was kind of the thinking. And a lot of the decisions about the format of the show were about the fact that I'm one person who doesn't really know how to make a podcast, trying to mitigate that as much as possible.
So you're one person in the podcast, and if you haven't listened to Monstrous Agonies yet, I implore you to go out and do it. The premise of the show is it's a pretty much life and romance advice show for members of the creature community. It's a hidden on the dial where normies can't get to, and so it really kind of feels like you're listening into something that might be hidden from you normally. You are one person figuring this out as you go. Was that set up, the idea that this is kind of both the actual show and then a little like what happens when the record is still the recording is still going, but the broadcast is off? Was that born out of not quite knowing how you're doing? Because it feels at parts, especially in the first few episodes in the early first season, that it's like someone's not quite familiar with the engineering board. Whoever is doing the sound engineer for the presenter and for the show, and they're kind of figuring out, should I shut it off now? Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that in there, which is very charming. How much of that was kind of planned in, and how much of that was just you figuring out what you were doing?
I think a lot of it was figuring out as I went, but I think it was also kind of going, what can I write that isn't going to get shown up by my lack of skills in this area, you know? So I was kind of going like, okay, if I sound like an amateur radio station, that kind of just sounds like an amateur podcast, you know, that's okay. And I can do that. And if it sounds like, you know, like that they're not quite sure when to press the button, or it's not quite the seamless transitions that it could be, that's okay. That works, you know? And then also some of it was born of necessity because I had decided, okay, it is only going to be, we're never going to sort of jump the shark and stop being the sort of 15-20 minutes at 2 a.m. on a Thursday in the radio station. So at no point, like, Monstrous Agonies isn't going to have we're wandering off and talking to people in the street or whatever. Right. You know, like it's
street interview. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. You know, we can play with that format a little, but fundamentally it is the advice show, and it is at this time, and it is for this length of time. And so it meant, well, anything that happens pretty much has to happen at 2 a.m. on a Thursday in this radio station, or somebody has to come in and say, you'll never guess what happened.
What happened? Yeah.
And so you're kind of trying to minimize the amount of awkward exposition of like, my goodness, just outside there's a dragon and he's really mad about it and you'll never guess, you know, and you're trying to avoid that. So it does mean we've got the character of Mab, who comes in much more in season 2, but she sort of just bursts into the studio and starts talking. And that works for that character, but I feel like if we had a lot of characters, you'd struggle with that, because you'd be going, well, surely not everybody is personality-wise sort of inclined to walk in while somebody's on air and just start talking at them.
Right.
So, yeah.
And that's a lovely... That works for Mab so well, because you find out, you know, there is a history between the presenter and Mab, and it does feel very much like an intrusion, not only into a show, but back into their personal life as well. So it's I'm
yes, and you've got the presenter who's sort of intensely private and is trying not to give anything of their personal life away, and then you've got Mab, who is just chatting about it on national radio quite
and I can see the presenter just frantically looking for the off button, meanwhile telling, get out of my studio, I'm recording.
Absolutely.
It's obvious they take their job very seriously, even if it is Thursday at 2 a.m. on a radio on an AM radio station. I think one of the things about your writing, and you're absolutely right to be proud of the quality of it, because the writing's very good.
Thank you. Of course, that's really why I agreed to this interview. Of
course, I'm going to flatter you. Yes, I'm going to pile flattery upon you. This is the cool thing for me, because I do love the show. So getting to sit down and chat with you about it is like, I'm fanning a little bit too. The writing is so good, and I think what is so seamless about it is you built a world that is so close to the real world, and yet there are just subtle changes in language, changes in how things are referred to. You know, there's the members of the night folk, the night community, have a language their own that is built upon what is recognizable, but at the same time just different enough to know that they're not talking about what. So tell me about that process. Tell me about deciding these are the terms that I'm going to use. These are the, whatever the case may be, of building that hidden world just beneath the waking world. Yeah.
It was actually something I was like slightly worried about when we first started, because I was like, you know, it is riffing on a lot of sort of social justice language. I had a bit of a worry that people wouldn't get that this was someone in that making fun of their own family, teasing a little, you know, when you say, you know, the vitally challenged, I'm not making fun of the idea of using inclusive language. It's just, you know, and so I did have a little concern that people wouldn't get that it was teasing, not mocking. It's the, you know, it's a bit of sort of jokey stuff. And I think also, like, in terms of where those phrases came from, like, I really wish that there was a really cool answer. I just think it's funny. I just do the ones that I think are funny for the most part.
That's a perfectly reasonable answer.
Yeah, and you kind of feel it out as well. Like, you know, I'm trans and non-binary, and there are so many words about what I am and how I identify that I could use. And I tend to just go with queer. That's the word that I use. And so I enjoy playing with the idea that you might say about your friend that they're from a somatically variable or somatically non-stable subgenus, but like they call themselves a shapeshifter, but you can't call them a shapeshifter unless
that's their term, right?
Exactly. That's their term for them. And you should be more careful, especially with people from somatically non-stable subgenuses that you don't necessarily know personally, and all of these kinds of things. And just kind of riffing on that, because I think you can think something is valuable and important and also quite silly, you know. And you go, this is important, but also it's a little bit silly. And one of the big ones for Monstrous Agonies is the word monster, which is contexts where there was one character who worked with a sapio. Sapio is the word that we use for kind of humans, but because you've got this blurry, you know, a witch is a member of the creature community or is, you know, considered to be a night folk person, but is also still human. So you kind of
they could pass in a sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sapio-seeming is a phrase that has come up a couple of times.
Yeah.
And so there's somebody who works with a Sapio colleague who has a mug that says, "I'm a real monster before I've had my coffee." And they're just like, I want to eat him alive in the middle of the office. Like, I hate that. And then you've got, in one of the bonus episodes, we do like a history of monster punk. And the fact that it's monster is actually important because it's riffing on queercore. It's riffing on
it's reclaiming the term.
Exactly. And the interviewee on that episode calls themselves a monster and calls their friends a monster really, really explicitly. And that's really fun. And there's other characters who really, really shy away from it and are like, nope, that's not reclaimed for me. That makes me super uncomfortable. Right. Yeah. And it's just sort of reflecting the diversity of the different communities that are kind of being represented in the show, so many communities have identified with monstrosity and been identified with monstrosity. And that's not just queer people. It's, it's across the board. If you're marginalized, somebody has monsterfied you.
It's the idea of otherness.
Exactly. And I think it was important to me to not make that homogenous and go, no, not everybody feels the same, because they don't. There's no rules here. You just listen and be kind. That's the rule. That's, So that was a slightly waffly answer, but
no, that was great. And it's such a simple rule too. You just be kind and be willing to listen. As a straight person, as a cis white het run of the mill, it took me a couple of episodes, honestly, to realize, this is a metaphor for the queer community. Like I was like, how do vampires get on when they meet their in-laws for the first time? Like, it just didn't click to me. And it took me a while to realize, I see what they're doing now. And it felt like looking behind a curtain. And the thing that I realized was the relationship advice that the presenter gives, it's all very good. It's all very well thought out. And it's very universal, which I think is such, like, people don't realize the universality of queer relationships and heteronormative relationships. The human heart beats the same way, regardless of what the outside
you still need to talk to your partner and be honest about what you need.
Exactly. And it's so good in that way, because I'm sure your queer listeners picked up right away what was going on. They knew, and I'm a little smarter than the average bear, but it still took me a while
honestly,
to get there.
I'm not gonna lie, it took me a while, and I was making it.
And that's what I was wondering, if that was the plan from the start, or if you just kind of realized that's what you were doing as you went along.
Yeah, it was primarily the audience's reaction that made me realize that was what was going on. And so I remember I can't remember the order of necessarily all of the episodes at the start, especially.
There's been like 60 or 70 at this point.
There's so many. So many. But like, when I first started writing Monstrous Agonies, I kind of was hoping it would be a cool horror thing. Like, I was like, this is going to be a cool horror thing. It's going to be spooky. And I was like, I don't really know how to write spooky things. Turns out I just keep writing nice things instead, and that's okay. But so, I knew that the problems would be a mixture of like metaphor or funny monster version of, and a few, oh no, you're just cursed, like you just haven't, like there's actually just a magic reason this is happening, kind of thing. And I knew there was going to be a mix of those, but I hadn't thought particularly that about it being a metaphor for queerness or for marginalization. It's just that when I came to think about being fundamentally radically different than the societal norm, obviously you start thinking about marginalization. That's exactly what that is, but it really took off because we accept submissions and prompts from our listeners, so they can write letters in. And so it was really that kind of drove it home for me, of like, not only is this what we were kind of doing anyway, but also how important this is and how much the audience is responding to that and really valuing that, you know? And I think that's been really helpful because it means that I felt empowered to write beyond my own experience, you know? So we've had a couple of letters about various disabilities. And I'm not disabled, but of course, of course we have disabled listeners. Of course they're, you know, super active in our community and say, okay, you want to talk about different bodies? Let's go.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
Let's do that. And I think sometimes it's been pretty accidental. Like there was somebody on Tumblr who made a really lovely post about there's a character whose friend is coming to visit who has lots of sort of dietary requirements and safety requirements. So she's like, oh, I have to get rid of all of the iron in the house and we can't have anything salt, and also nothing like electric works when my friend visits. Yeah. So we have to make all of these sort of adaptations. And somebody on Tumblr was like, that is honestly like the only good rep I've ever seen of severe food allergies and complicated dietary requirements. And I was like, oh, I was doing, you know,
fairies are allergic to iron and stuff.
I was like, I had the monster idea and then worked that sort of backwards. And they were like, no, that was really important for me. That was really, you know, effective. And I was like, you're welcome. Thank you for letting me know. Because I just sort of looked into it, really.
Nah, you claim that, so you meant it all along.
Oh, yeah.
They're doubly impressed.
Yeah.
So it's learning for you just as much as it is.
Yeah.
As I guess you teaching in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that sort of loops back into the question about language as well. One example that I do come back to quite often is there was a couple, one was aromantic but not asexual, and the other was asexual but not aromantic.
I remember that one.
And and one of them needed blood to survive and was feeding on their partner, and then was uncomfortable with the sort of sexual connotations of feeding directly off a person. And you know, I tend to, when I'm writing, I'm not going to tell you what kind of monster it is. I'm not going to tell you what kind of metaphor it is. It's like, you read it, you can do this. I trust you. And so I would never have written, I am aromantic and not asexual, and my partner is asexual and not aromantic. I just wouldn't have done that because that's not my writing style. But this person who made that submission listened to our show and went, yeah, I can do this. This is a safe place for me to say, these are the words I want to use. And this is the language that matters to me. And here's the letter using the words I use about myself that reflects something about me. And that really, you know, people are like, oh my God, it's like explicit rep of these identities that really don't get any. And I was like, that wasn't me. That was you. That was all you. Like, that's the joy of taking, you know, submissions from other people, is that they get to use the words that are important to them to use and to claim that and to really, you know, tell their story in their own language, even if it's also a story about vampires, you know.
You can have both. Vampires need their own language. No,
exactly.
You're absolutely right, though. The importance of claiming your own language. You know, the gift of speech is something that I think humanity takes for granted more often than not. The fact that we can label and own and understand and share with just the mouth gunk coming out of our vocal cords, you know.
Right.
The listener emails fascinate me in the sense that, yes, it shows a vibrant and growing community, which as a creator on the internet, I'm envious of, but also when you get those letters in, how have you ever found yourself just straight reading the letter on the air, or do you put everything through your filter?
Yeah.
Write them? Yeah.
Pretty often. I mean, it depends, because we accept like one-line prompts as well. So sometimes they're like, Gorgon can't make friends because of the stone thing. And you're like, okay, let's run with that. What might that look like?
Yeah.
And then some people write in a full letter. There's definitely been letters that have just gone in almost completely unedited. I've maybe taken a hello off the front because we don't really start with that. But that, apart from that, they are pretty much word for word copy and paste, which is great when you're having a really slow day and you're like, I don't want to write.
Can't get the writing. Yeah.
You're just like, I got a full submission, so I'm just gonna.
This is great. Oh, this is so much easier for me.
Yeah. Oh God, I only have to do the answer, and that's just talk about it. Like, yeah. And so some of them do. Some of them, most often, if somebody has written a full letter, the only editing I do is editing down. Sometimes they get a little long, and sometimes they've got really fantastic ideas that aren't adding anything to the real core of the letter. So they're really fun world-building ideas, but they're not actually doing anything for the main hook, you know. And sometimes people will add things into their letters that I'm like, oh, I need to change the language here because we've already established such and such, or I'm actually not prepared to confirm that jellicle cats are a special genus in Monstrous Agonies. I'm gonna edit that a little bit.
You're not gonna have a butthole cut of that episode? Yeah.
No, I'm not having a butthole cut.
All right, brave, but okay.
Yeah, I feel like a butthole cut in a podcast is so much worse because someone has to say it.
Yes, because you've got to describe it.
Describe it. So sometimes I edit for world building purposes solely, or just language. You know, changing human to sapio, for example. But quite often, they do just go in kind of as they are. If someone's written a full episode, and I think also because one of the reasons that I wanted to take submissions was because I realized that if I'm writing 2 letters and 2 responses every week, so there's 70 episodes, it's 148 letters and 140 answers, my writing voice is going to dominate.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, which I'm fine with on the answers. But on the letters, I want you to kind of feel like other people are doing things. You know, I want it to feel like other thoughts, other brains are processing these issues. And, you know, it's all right for the presenter to always speak the same. But, you know, by Amber, the brummy Mongolian deathworm needs to have a slightly different voice than you know, sexy sentient tapeworm or whatever. Like they need to be different. And I don't necessarily have the awareness as a writer to be able to do that, you know, consistently. So when people do write submissions, I tend not to edit. I try and keep as much of their language as possible. Partly because I think that's a respect thing. They've put the effort into writing it in their words, and I've asked them to. And partly because I think it makes the program better, you know, to hear different voices, you know.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, yeah, and you do get this sense, and I think you're absolutely right, that it is not just one person writing, you know, that there is a community listening, both, you know, to the presenter and to your show. So that's a smart choice there.
Thank you.
I don't know if my ego would have been able to handle sharing the credit with anybody else. But
well, the nice thing is that people always forget which one's the submissions anyway. So they're like, oh, I love that letter. And I'm like, thank you.
Thank you. You wrote it. Yeah. Are people ever surprised when they hear their letters on? Or do you let them know beforehand? Or
I don't let them know beforehand. Okay. They go in roughly in the order that they're submitted. But we we closed submissions last season at like Christmas, like months and months and months before the season finished, because we just filled up.
Great. Good problem to have.
Brilliant. Absolutely. Yeah. And so people didn't necessarily know when theirs would be because they didn't know when they had come in relation to the others that were going up. So we actually had the person who wrote the very, very last letter of season 2 was on Tumblr and reblogged the week before the penultimate episode going, oh no, I think my letter got lost. And I like messaged them and I was like, is yours this one? And they were like, yes. And I was like, oh no, I love it so much. It's going to be the last one. It's the last one of the season. So that was, you know, just to sort of assuage their fears.
Yeah,
it's okay. So no, I don't think people are necessarily surprised, but everyone has been wonderfully positive when they've heard it, and any of the feedback has just been, you know, really lovely. Just and quite, it feels quite a lot to take somebody else's work and just plop it into your show, and because they're not, nobody here is getting paid. There's no, it's not a professional credit or something. It's not something you can, it's just something that they've had a cool idea and have put the energy and effort into sending it. And so I feel quite protective of them, and I really want to do a good job.
Absolutely. Has anybody ever gotten back to you taking the presenter's advice and letting you know how it turned out?
And not explicitly, but there was one who was a creature who has lots and lots of different sensory perception, but not sight. And so when they're on the surface, they use a cane to get around. And they were talking about their colleagues being quite infantilizing, and what can I do about this?
Yeah, I remember that one.
And then the advice was like, you got to give them the opportunity. It's kinder to them as well,
right?
To tell them how to look after you. Like that's basically just, you deserve to speak up about this. And that person did share that and go like, "Ooh, guess I need to have a chat with my colleagues." So I hope that turned out well. I didn't see any follow up, but yeah. So occasionally people, and I've had a couple of people write in as well who have just in a sort of general sense saying that the themes of the advice given have helped them in their normal life, because so much of it is about integrity and honesty and being true to who you are and what you need. But also something that I think comes up over and over again is this idea that the people who love you want to do right by you, and you are helping them. It is a privilege to help and support the ones that you love. You're not a burden. You are giving them the gift of looking after you. And that's a good thing. And you can embrace that. And that kind of reframing away from, people are going to get annoyed at me asking for help. And it's like, no, people are going to be glad. They're going to be grateful. They're going to be so happy that you asked. And I think that that's helped quite a few people to sort of, sort of shift their frame of reference a little. So, and I think that's the bit that I find really overwhelming, actually. It's when people write in and I'm like, this helped me in my real life. And I'm like, great.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really cool. Thank you.
Hey there, Boddlers. It's Jason from Even Footing Games. They asked me to do a spooky ad about Anchor FM, and the spookiest thing I can think of is not knowing what Anchor FM is! If you haven't heard of Anchor by Spotify by now, it is the easiest way to make a podcast, and it's got everything you need all in one place. Anchor's got tools that allow you to record and edit your podcasts right from your phone or computer. And when you host on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify or Apple Podcast or any of your favorite podcasting apps. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place, and best of all, it is free. So go to anchor.fm or download the Anchor app today to get started. Boo!
I hope it's all right for me to write to you. Me and my friend have known each other since uni. My family's a bit complicated. I've got this one cousin, is an obligate carnivore. Situation is being complicated by her thrall. My girlfriend is from a different genus to me. I say no neighbours. There is one. I've got lots of friends who are creatures. Which Muppet is the sexiest? And I wish I could tell you I didn't see the mushrooms until it was too late. But I'm so lonely. Time's a bit weird here. Rubbing themselves clean, their arms, their face, wiping over every part of themselves. My cabbages. I kissed her under oceans, among the stars. Yuck! And before you know it, it's stop, drop and roll in the middle of the foyer. Cold, emotionless eyes. There's no sugarcoating it. I died. You can imagine that it's a bit of a sore spot for me. Too bloody weird. I don't want to hurt my friend. I don't want to get the council involved. How can I make amends to her? How do I close this distance between us? Is there any salvaging this situation? How do I stop feeling like this? I'm at my wit's end, but isn't there anything I can do? What can I do? What should I do? Please help. Monstrous Agonies. Weekly advice for creatures of the night. New episodes every Thursday. Listen online at monstrousagonies.co.uk or wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you do research when you're tackling a question? Like, do you look into, have you listened to a lot of other advice shows, or because
I don't tend to listen to
or are you just taking your 30 years of experience on Earth?
Yeah, I'm very wise.
Very for your age, very impressive.
Yeah. No, I don't listen to other advice shows or read other agony aunts because they're almost all really, like, they're horrible. So many of them are really horrible. Like, so many of them.
Yeah.
They are really, and horrible in both ways, both the advice and the problems. You know, that there's so many that are like, my husband fundamentally dislikes me. How do I suck it up?
Yeah.
You know, and the advice is, oh, well, here's some tips for dealing with, and none of them are divorce.
Divorce,
you know?
yeah.
Like, or they're just, there's not many. There is, my mum cut out a pile of, clippings from a magazine called The Spectator, and she cut out all of the agony aunt letters for weeks and weeks. I mean, it's a proper chunk, and posted them to me. So I do look through those sometimes because they're usually quite chill. They're like, oh, there's a letter in Monstrous Agonies of a couple who have been together for about 800 years, I think, and they've got a huge collection of historic erotica of themselves. But you know, and it like started with some woodcuts. That's
hilarious.
And went on from there. And they've got like oil paintings and tapestries and Fabergé eggs. And it's just this. And they're like, but we are, you know, coming to the end of our lives now, and we don't know what to do with this. This is a really important collection for us. It's very emotional, but we don't want our kids going through it.
Right,
you know?
yeah.
And that was lifted from one of those letters that my mum sent me. Was, we've got some photos from the 70s. And you know, and they're usually they're okay because they're kind of funny and chill, and the stakes aren't that high.
Right.
Whereas quite often they're a bit, other ones that I see, you're just like, just break up. This is a horrible relationship. What are you doing this?
It should be 2 words. Yeah. End it. And that's it.
End it.
Yeah.
Leave. Like, so I don't use a lot of real ones, but I do an awful lot of research while I'm actually writing. And part of that is because I've got ADHD and am incapable of thinking something and not opening a tab and immediately Googling it. But also because I've learned about myself as a writer that I need to have a certain amount of sort of internal imaginative landscape filled in before I can do the work. You know, the character who uses a stick to aid them while they're above ground because they can't see. So I did like a weird amount of research on creatures who don't have eyes, and, you know, animals that live in caves and that kind of thing. And it wasn't, none of that came in. I didn't write that they were actually one of these real life animals or anything, but it was just to help me kind of build a space that I can work in and know what kind of is in there, if that makes sense. That's a bit.
Yeah, no, that's you needed the subtext before you could write the context.
Yeah. And I think it also, because you're shifting gears quite quickly, you know, you've got 2 letters per episodes, and you kind of have to go, okay, clunk, I need a relatively unknown cryptid from the UK who isn't as famous as Nessie. Big cats. Okay, that's cool. We've got, you know, British big cats. That's and then you go, oh, now I've got to wait. Oh, what's a funny historical thing for someone to claim they were at when they weren't? Guy Fawkes getting arrested, you know, and you need to. I'm not quick enough to come up with those. off the top of my head. I have to go and Google and click around, see what's out there.
That's why we have the whole of human knowledge at our fingertips at all times, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. How convenient for us. We don't have to think about stuff. Great. I use it all the time. You've started doing this more and more as the show progresses, is to kind of picking different accents and different demeanors for when you're reading the letters. Was that a conscious choice to sort of show off that you can do different accents or voices, or was it more just
to say that I can do them? It's more that I will do them.
Well, yeah. I mean, hey, you're coming from the untrained ear of an American here. If I can differentiate between South and North England, I'm happy.
Right. Yeah. So that was less about sort of stretching my acting chops and more about, well, there's a lot of letters we've got. I kind of need them to. I think I also got. I'm not. A lot of people who are in audio fiction actually come from other theatrical backgrounds. Yeah. Like a lot of them have come through the stage, or I mean, even tabletop RPGs are a really underrated form of amateur acting, people, it's 100%.
The most popular show is all cartoon voice actors,
Right, exactly.
They've come from outside, absolutely.
Yeah, and so a huge quantity of people from audio fiction are acting a lot or have been acting a lot. I haven't. I'm a writer. I was never a stage kid. I was never a theater kid. I was never in the school plays. I don't really like doing that very much.
That surprises me, honestly.
Right?
Because you feel so natural. Yeah.
It just doesn't. Something about it just. I think I get so embarrassed, and I just can't let go of that and relax into it. And and I know sensibly that you're going to look more silly if you kind of half do it and don't really care, and you're gonna look better if you just go absolutely like chew the scenery, get it done. But it took me, I still have that in me to just go like, I'd really rather play a tree, I'd really rather just and I think one of the reasons that the voice acting gets a little more diverse as it goes on is that I relaxed and I got less embarrassed. And I realized that actually when I did the Texan werewolf, nobody wrote in and was like, that was awful. They were like, yeehaw, look at you go. I'm like, yeah, okay. And
it was fine. It was fine. It was a good effort.
It was a good effort. Yeah. I feel like I should have just gone to town and done the full yeehaw. Like
just really leaned into it.
Yeah, there is the yeehaw.
I know enough people from Texas that would have been perfectly spot on.
Yeah. Well, that's
they're also leaning into it.
Because the thing is that I was talking to a friend from Texas about this actually, where I was like, I don't ever want to sound like I'm making fun of anybody's accent, And she was like, yeah, but we sound like that. You're not making fun of us. We do sound like that. And I'm like, oh, right, okay. And I think that helped as well, realizing that nobody's going to be offended. Although my a Scottish friend of mine, after my first attempt at a Scottish accent, was like, it was no worse than anything in Highlander. And I was like, that's not really a compliment.
That was a French guy doing a Scottish accent, speaking a language he really didn't know. I don't know how.
Thanks.
I mean, the one Sean Connery, but he was playing a Spanish guy. So
you've got an Irish guy playing a Spanish guy and a Belgian playing a Scotsman. And it's well, and then Monstrous Agonies comes in.
Yeah, great. Thanks. It was no worse than that.
Yeah, I did also realize partway through season 2, like one of my sort of default voices is a bad impression of David Tennant. And I just and I don't think it's a good enough impression of David Tennant.
You watched some Doctor Who when you were time.
A little bit.
Just a little bit.
But yeah, I don't think it's a good enough impression of David Tennant that you can tell. But I realize that I'm doing it. And I'm like, really? It's just...
I mean, I think the key is to keep it not that good so that nobody starts going, oh, what? They're doing a bad David Tennant. That's what's going on.
Exactly. They're just like, that's a completely original voice.
That's very important. The presenter's voice, though, is so even-keeled and yet warm, even when they're being... There's some tough love that goes in there, There, a lot of it is, like you said, it's not suck it up and deal. It's suck it up and do the hard thing that you need to do. Which made me, when I first started listening, I'm like, oh, this person has either done some national public radio or has listened to a lot of that, because they've got the tone that that. And
yeah, I'm definitely doing my BBC voice.
Yes, that's exactly. It's very radio voice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's late night radio for 100%. And I think I was actually talking to a friend about the difference between radio in America and radio in the UK, because the Night Folk Network wouldn't exist in the UK because tiny, weird, niche indie radio stations don't exist here. If the Night Folk Network existed here, it would be a digital only branch of the BBC. And it wouldn't be broadcasting on FM radio, or it would be a late night slot that actually most people listen to online after the fact, but it wouldn't exist. We don't really have those little radio stations. But I think that kind of helped the presenter's voice, because it was like, oh, I do the BBC voice. And I know what that is because we've only got,
because that's all
5 radio stations. Right. We're all doing the BBC voice. I know how to do this. And I think it feels extremely Radio 4 often. Like if you tune it, we actually, because the start and the end of each episode have the sort of sound of a tuning radio and the static. And it's my favorite bit to do of the whole show. I love it. The
little glimpses of whatever other shows they're doing. Yeah, those are fun. Those are a lot of fun.
Exactly. Yeah. And late night Radio 4 is genuinely a phenomenal source for that, because they're always doing there was one, it was 2 a.m, and they were talking about sourdough, and they were doing a whole segment about sourdough. And I got all these wonderful people saying well, I'm not sure I'd say it was alive, and it's been in our family for generations. And it's all of these incredible snippets of people talking about the most out there stuff, or you've got somebody reading from Shacklebolt's diary or something, and you're just what are you talking about? This is amazing. Yeah, whereas if you try and find sort of your pop music radio, and you're yeah, that's great for a little but it's nobody's saying anything interesting.
You're not going to get anything interesting.
Yeah, whereas late night Radio 4, genuinely, who knows what you're going to get? It's gonna be
it feels very... I don't know if the UK had cable access TV shows. From what I understand, everything is BBC, so there's nothing that gets in that isn't BBC.
We have other service providers are available.
Okay, all right. I haven't done my deep dive into UK media. I'm sorry, but the cable access TV in the States is very much that if you have a strong enough signal and can find some empty airwave space, you can put yourself on TV.
No, we don't have that at all. And
that's where you find the weird stuff for us. It's the Battlestar Galactica fan show where everyone's in full Cylon gear the entire time and nobody mentions the fact that
they're just fine with it.
That's just what we do on a Thursday night.
Yeah.
That's the good stuff. You don't find that so much anymore in the States, just because everybody has to own everything now. There's no, we're running out of free space.
Yeah. And I suppose a lot of that stuff is going online now. I mean, why would you? Absolutely. You can reach a bigger audience if you do that on YouTube or you do that on Twitch, and I think podcasting, it's really interesting trying to explain fiction podcasts to people who really only think that podcasts are one thing. And you're going, it's radio plays. Everyone else is talk radio and we're doing radio plays. That's the only difference. We're just doing it online.
For a wider audience and a more specific audience. And I think you're absolutely right when you say, the podcast community, the podcast sphere is probably the most open as far as what you're going to find, because there's no regulations. But it's also because it's safe for a lot of people. Monstrous is a huge queer positive show. And I think that's what brings in a lot of your listeners. There's a safe space. And I think there are a lot of podcasts that, may not necessarily be horror fantasy podcasts with queer representation, but there's a lot of it out there. You know what I mean? To some extent, it feels marginalized because it speaks so directly to a marginalized audience. And
I agree. And I think it's no coincidence that, so one of my jobs in my other life is social media. And, everyone talks about, oh, you need to be on Twitter. You need to be on Twitter. I do social media for a game studio and we need to be on Reddit. That's where gamers are. And audio fiction, you need to be on Tumblr. That's where audio fiction listeners are en masse. And it's because, oh yeah, no, seriously, like Tumblr is like, Twitter is where you talk to your colleagues in the industry, but Tumblr is where your listeners are, where your actual, the people who are making fan art, who are engaging in your work, and who
you can't do porn anymore. I mean,
they find a way.
It's still there. They found a way to get around that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. But that's where they are. That's where they're engaging, and I don't think that that's any coincidence because Tumblr has also, for so long, been an incredibly gay corner of the internet.
Yes.
And
it's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, so much of it is about anonymity. It's one of the last social media sites where you are completely anonymous.
Yes.
Actually. And there's no algorithm. There's no expectation that your profile picture is you or that you've got your real legal name as your username. You just sort of scurry in there and roll about in the weirdness for a bit. When you have a medium that has an incredibly low barrier for entry, you can make a podcast on your phone. You can just do that. We're all carrying around with us microphones that are better than people who were making radio with, and naturally that means that creators who would otherwise find it difficult to break into the sort of mainstream or difficult to get past sort of, the sort of gatekeepers, or who are telling stories that don't fall easily into those kind of categories. You're like, yeah, I've got a trans character, but they're fine about it. They're not actually miserable. And they're like, oh, well, we can't sell that. So
Right. Or we don't even really make it a thing past the person. Yeah.
It's just literally it comes up once in passing. And trying to get that kind of narrative past, heteronormative, cisnormative editors and marketing teams and so on is incredibly difficult. And you don't have that in podcasting. And so you have, I think in fiction podcasting, because Welcome to Night Vale was our big one.
Yeah.
That was
the reveal that he was gay. It was just like, oh my God, it came out of nowhere, but it wasn't a big
But it wasn't,
deal.
And it was consistent, and it was
it didn't feel
normal.
shoved. Yeah.
Right. And the fact that Welcome to Night Vale specifically was the fiction podcast that other people who don't listen to fiction podcasts have listened to.
The one
and it's the one. And the fact that our biggie, our kind of, Lord of the Rings to fantasy kind of moment was about a gay man.
We'll love to hear that. Yeah.
was about a gay man and written by a gay man. And and that I think fundamentally shapes the landscape. Yeah. And so you've got all of that combining, and you've got Tumblr being a very, very gay part of the internet, and also where fandom is, where it's normal to post your fanfic and your fan art and to go, I just want to talk about this one guy from this TV show who I think's really cool, and just do that for years. And that's normal. That and so
you have an audience and people will comment.
Yeah, you'll post another picture of that guy from that one TV show, and everyone go, "We do like that. Thank you. Yeah, that was great. We are fond of him." I think all of these things combine to make audio fiction and Tumblr kind of like chocolate spread and peanut butter. They're just like
goes together so well.
They just it's so good.
Do you feel like they are kind of a bastion, or is it a wave? Is this are they the inclusiveness in Tumblr and podcasts? Are they going to be where we go from here?
Yes, I think I think we've got a long way before mainstream media gets to where audio fiction is in terms of representation.
Sure.
I think we see, let's take queer representation as one example, because it's quite cool now, actually. And you can make your characters trans, you can make them gay. That's cool. You still have relatively few sort of models for what that can look like, so you can have a trans woman, but only if she's got a certain kind of story and a certain kind of role. And she's very rarely going to be the unproblematized love interest of your rom-com.
Right.
And also you can have a gay main character if he's a really lovely high school boy and he's so cute. And it's like,
okay.
do you know how many cute high school boys I know in the queer community? None. I'm 30. Yeah. Come on. Yeah.
Well, you probably shouldn't be spending time with too many cute high school boys when you're 30, but I get what you mean, yeah.
But where are the people who look like anyone I actually spend time with, or the adult media, like not adult, but
right.
whereas the grown-up stories that are queer without being tragic,
right?
And I don't think that we've got there yet. I think also a lot mainstream media, I think, wants to and profits from a narrative of, oh, we're all the same, really. It's all the same, really.
Yeah.
And that's not true. My life is different than your life on a number of fundamental axes. That doesn't mean that one is inherently worse or better or, more valuable to tell a story about or any of those things. But we don't. One thing that I think comes through Monstrous Agonies, or I hope comes through, is that different is good. Different is good, and being different and recognizing your difference and celebrating it. Or if you can't celebrate it, at least note it and acknowledge that, actually somebody with a visual impairment does need fundamentally different things in the world than somebody without. That's fine, and it's silly to say that, oh, well, it's all the same. And I don't think the mainstream media is there in that kind of representation. And I think it's very selective about who gets to be the rep. So, I hear people talk about like, oh, it's so stereotypical to have like a fat butch lesbian in something. And I'm like, name one thing. Name one fat butch lesbian on Netflix, please give me the Rex. Like, like, tell me any, and I don't know. I think when I see sort of mainstream outlets looking at podcasting as a form of fiction, because it happens about 2-3 times a year, where usually the New York Times weirdly comes out and goes, what if a movie was just audio? Wouldn't that be cool? What? Imagine a podcast, but it was made up.
Newspapers are dead media.
It's just nonsense. But they never are actually looking at, first of all, what's already there, or what the traditions of the medium are. They aren't looking at what makes that medium interesting and what's cool about it and how that can affect your storytelling. They're just going, hey, what if we can make some money off that using the same boring stories we always do? Because then we don't have to pay for new exciting stories.
Exactly.
Genius.
I've got the stable of writers who have written the same thing for 30 years. We'll just have them change some names around. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, having said all of that, like, audio fiction is fabulous for some kinds of representation and lousy for others. Like, it is incredibly hard for actors of color to break into voice acting and to get into podcasting unless they're on shows made by people of color, and it's like, well, why aren't white writers giving people this? Also, because it's audio. They don't have to match their character.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Well, someone's gonna have a problem with it somewhere, though.
Oh yeah, Yeah, but like you're always going to offend someone, and I think
That's
you have
true.
to be honest
That's
about
true.
that and choose who you're going to offend,
Right.
and go, actually, if I'm offending those guys over there,
then we're doing okay.
I'm doing a good job.
Fine.
Yep, fine with that.
The fascist Jordan Peterson neckbeards are mad. Good, I did it.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine.
Yeah. So, what do you listen to? What are your podcasts of choice right now? What are you consuming?
So I'm made fun of regularly and rightly for being someone who loves podcasts and would love to listen to one day. Like I really struggle to find the time and the sort of brain power. But the ones that I go back to are also not by no accident. They're also the people who have been on Monstrous Agonies, because
it's fair. You're friends.
So the Mist Home Museum of Mystery, Morbidity and Mortality.
Okay.
I thought Monstrous Agonies was a bit long. Then
clocking in at 20 minutes an episode.
Yeah. But the Mist Home is a fabulous podcast. The premise is that you're listening to the audio tour guide of a museum full of supernatural objects.
Okay. So just little
and there's
10-minute snippets.
Yeah, they are. And so I think it's no surprise that it's one of my absolute favorites, because it's got one narrator. It's got 2 stories per episode. Each episode is about 20 minutes. And I'm like, wow.
Sounds familiar. All right.
Why is this exactly what I love? But it's absolutely fabulous. And Dom Guilfoyle, who makes the show, they were actually in the 2nd season Monstrous Agonies as the CEO. So they play our baddie. Yes. Yeah. And then Neighbourly is a podcast made in Ireland. So I live in Belfast, which is in Northern Ireland. And Matty, who makes Neighbourly, lives in Dublin, so the south. So we have like all island podcasting, solidarity, but beef.
Exactly.
Pretty much the 2 podcasts on this landmass.
It's a tiny little island.
It's a tiny little island. So Neighbourly it's set on a street called Little Street, and each episode goes behind the door of a different house on Little Street.
Okay, I know this one. I listened to this one. Okay.
Yeah, it's fab.
Yeah,
it's
fab.
Really good. Really, really like it. And then The Secret of St. Kilda blew my socks off finished earlier this year, I think, actually. So they've had 1 season, and it's Lockie McGregor is a con man who fakes his death and runs away to the little Scottish island of St. Kilda, where the people there are definitely not a cult. Definitely not a cult. And
it's got situation somewhere in
there. Yeah. It has everyone in British and Irish podcasting except me and Matty in. Like, it's got
they'll work in season 2. Yeah.
Genuinely, like, because I've become quite good friends with the writers, so I'm like, can you
where's my part? Yeah.
Come on, I deserve it. I got the jumpers, I can do it. This is gonna be amazing. So yeah, and it's absolutely phenomenal, really incredible. And then the Salt Verses as well would be my
I'm working on talking with John and Muna to have them on the show. Yeah,
amazing. Yeah. The Salt Verses is one that I'm always like, the thing about podcasts is so often you're like, is this massive or is this just incredible? And so I'm always surprised that anyone isn't listening to the Salt Verses.
Right, it's amazing. It's amazing.
It is. And talk about like really understanding what your medium can do for you, and really leaning into that. It's just incredible.
The stuff that, some of those episodes.
Yeah.
And just their world building is exactly like we manufacture our gods now in factories. Wow, what? Yeah, it's so
yeah.
So I'm looking forward to sitting down with them, because that's that. And I Am in the Skew is also really good too, but
I haven't listened to that one yet, but
that was their first podcast. It's quite good. It's more of an anthology, but Salt Verses, they're nailing something.
It's phenomenal.
So
it's phenomenal.
It's so good.
Yeah. I remember I was listening to it while I had a lot of baking to do. Just a very intense baking weekend. Every year I make my partner a really elaborate birthday cake.
Well, that's
sweet. So it's really fun, and I really, really love doing it. But it's always just this like weekend where I'm just taking over the kitchen. Everything's covered in flour and icing sugar and food coloring, and then I come forth with Padme Amidala as a biscuit, you know, or whatever it is. And so
what a couple of nerds.
Yeah, it's true. So I was making his cake one year and was like, you know what, finally I'm going to be standing in one place doing something that I can focus on long enough to listen to the Silk verses. And I literally had it like tucked into my shoulder, like I think it was in my binder strap, and I was like pressed up against it and like trying to listen, and I was like stopping baking just to stand in awe and just go.
Did you end up making a trawler man cake?
I didn't, but I really want to. Just like, or like horrible like crab people.
Oh, it's so good.
So good.
Well, Hero, I have kept you for longer than I wanted. Than I told you I was going to keep you, but this has been such a good conversation, and I've enjoyed
I'm a chatter. I feel like I should warn everyone who asks to talk to me, because I'm like, however long you think it's going to take, add an extra like 15 minutes, half an hour, because I
perfect. Perfect. I have one last question. What type of creature is the presenter?
Ooh, make it up.
Okay, so you're doing that? You're going to pull that? All right.
Yep. That's what I pull every time.
Anytime anybody asks you, that's your pat answer?
Yeah. I'm like,
do you know?
Whatever
do you
want.
Have an answer of your own? No?
No.
Haven't thought about it? All right.
No, I think also like I'm far too big-headed to ever come down on one or the other, because the presenter is quite understandably one of the characters who gets the most fan art. And I really love seeing everybody's different interpretations.
Okay.
You know, so there's one that's like a galaxy, but they wear a little collar and spats. And there's one who's like huge and wears like big woolly jumpers and is just like has a kind of flame head. Somebody else has like deer antlers and stuff. And I'm like, I'm not stuffing that. That's phenomenal.
That's fair. All right. The presenter will remain ambiguous and open to interpretation then.
Exactly.
My guest has been Hero Owen. It has been an absolute delight. They are the creator and driving force behind Monstrous Agonies, a podcast for the creature community on the Night Folk Network. I have had such a blast talking with you, and I am so glad that we got a chance to sit down and chat. And please, please, please just keep making the wonderful, wonderful show that you're making. Because it is a delight. We'll have all of Hero's social media and links to Monstrous Agonies in the chat. Check it out. It's really just a lovely, delightful, funny, silly podcast with a lot of heart, which here at Even Footing Games is exactly what we love the most. So, Hero, thank you again so much. And ring us up anytime you've got something new in the books, and we'll be happy to sit down and talk about it.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much to you folks out there. Check out our social media. We are evenfootinggames.com. Babies and Broadswords is still out. Keep an eye out for new modules that are coming our way, and we'll talk to you next time.